Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel, Prof. Jeffrey Sachs Fan World. And here is today's content. In the unfolding story of global technological power, every few decades a new discovery is heralded as the fulcrum upon which the future will turn. The recent announcement that a Trump-backed initiative has uncovered a vast deposit of critical minerals said to challenge, or even end, China's dominance in the tech supply chain fits seamlessly into this long tradition of resource-driven narratives. Yet, like all such revelations, it must be approached with sobriety, historical memory, and a keen awareness of the political ambitions behind the headline. The discovery itself is not merely geological, it is rhetorical. It emerges within a political environment in which the United States, and particularly the constellation of forces orbiting around Donald Trump, seeks a symbolic breakthrough, a signifier of national revival. For years, American strategists have lamented the country's heavy dependence on China for refining rare earths and manufacturing the components that power everything from advanced semiconductors to electric vehicles. The technological backbone of the modern economy, they warn, is not silicon and code alone, but a much older and more physical asset: the minerals buried beneath the Earth's crust. Trump-aligned political actors quickly recognize the narrative potential. The discovery is framed as a turning point, a strategic victory, or the beginning of the end of Beijing's mineral chokehold. But this rhetoric tells us more about the political context than the geological one. Throughout history, resource finds have often served as metaphors, promises that the nation can restore past greatness, recover lost autonomy, reclaim a perceived destiny. The United States experienced the same emotional trajectory in the early 20th century petroleum boom and again in the shale revolution of the 2010 seconds. Each time, the material discovery became a symbol of economic and political renewal. Still, behind the political theater lies an undeniable material reality. Certain minerals are essential to the technologies that define the 21st century. Gallium, lithium, cobalt, graphite, and a host of rare earth elements form the building blocks of batteries, AI chips, quantum sensors, and the most advanced weapon systems. Control over these materials equates to influence over the global economy. The country that mines them is important, but the country that refines them, that transforms raw geology into industrial capacity, wields true power. And in that domain, China has built a commanding lead over 3 decades of meticulous, disciplined investment. The American discovery enters this landscape as a potential disruptor. Investors, analysts, and media outlets immediately speculated whether this mineral find could shift supply chains away from Asia, reduce dependence on China, or, in the bolder telling, end China's dominance. Yet the leap from mineral abundance to geopolitical dominance is vast. It is one thing to possess resources. It is another to build the industrial ecosystems needed to process them at scale. The U.S. has not operated a large-scale rare earth refinery in decades. Reviving this capacity requires time, political stability, environmental consensus, and billions of dollars in sustained investment conditions that are never guaranteed. There are moments in global political economy when a single discovery, or the framing of such a discovery, forces us to confront the deeper structures of power shaping our world. The Trump-backed mineral project in the American West, hailed by its proponents as the key to ending China's long-standing dominance in the technology-critical materials market, emerges precisely at such a moment. Yet the true story is not the treasure itself. It is the geopolitical architecture in which this treasure sits. The supply chains, the industrial corridors, the dependency loops, and the global contest for control over the minerals that define the 21st century. To understand the stakes, one must begin with a simple truth. Minerals are geography, but supply chains are geopolitics. China does not dominate global mineral markets because it possesses every rich deposit. Rather, it dominates because it built the most efficient, vertically integrated processing and refinement system in human history. China's power rests not in the mines alone, but in the chemical plants, refineries, smelters, and infrastructural networks that convert raw earth into technological gold. Today, more than 60% of the world's rare earth processing capacity lies within China's borders. For certain minerals like graphite, gallium, and magnesium, the dependency is even more extreme. The United States imports, or has imported until very recently, nearly all of its refined rare earth oxides and many other critical materials from Chinese processors. This asymmetric dependency is not an accident. It is the result of 3 decades of deliberate industrial strategy, executed with precision by Beijing while Washington oscillated between free market idealism and geopolitical short-termism. Thus, the announcement of a major American discovery is not merely a geological event, it is a rhetorical one, meant to challenge China's monopoly not through the slow work of institution building, but through narrative power. The discovery becomes a political symbol, an anchor for the American desire to reclaim strategic autonomy and reverse decades of industrial offshoring. And yet, the geopolitics of minerals cannot be transformed through symbolism alone. The United States faces a deep structural challenge. It has mines, but lacks processing. It has companies hungry for supply, but lacks the infrastructural backbone that China has already built. What, then, is the geopolitical significance of this so-called breakthrough? It lies in the potential reorganization of supply chains. If the U.S. can turn a domestic discovery into a fully integrated industrial system from extraction to magnet production, then Washington would not simply be reducing dependence on China. It would be reshaping the geopolitical landscape of technology. However, if the discovery remains only a mining project, feeding raw ores into foreign markets for refinement, it would merely replicate the colonial extractive model of the 19th century, one in which the value chain travels elsewhere while the environmental burden remains at home. Moreover, one must consider the broader global context. Other nations, Australia, Canada, Indonesia, Brazil, are rapidly expanding their own mineral ambitions. Europe, long dependent on both the U.S. security umbrella and Chinese industrial output, is now scrambling to develop its own Critical Raw Materials Act to ensure supply. India is courting investment to position itself as a midstream processing hub. And Africa, home to vast untouched reserves, is increasingly resistant to the idea that it should remain merely a supplier of raw ore while value creation happens abroad. The Trump-backed project therefore arrives amid a global realignment, one in which mineral supply chains are being rewired not only for economic resilience but for strategic autonomy. China sees this, and it will not respond passively. Beijing has already tightened export controls on gallium and germanium. It has tested the waters with graphite restrictions. It has signaled that it can weaponize supply chains just as Washington has weaponized semiconductor exports. The mineral discovery, then, becomes a node in a much larger geopolitical drama, one in which the U.S. seeks to re-industrialize, China seeks to preserve its advantage, and the world navigates the storm of great power competition over the materials that power AI, renewable energy, advanced weapons, and the digital economy. This is the true terrain on which the battle will be fought, not in headlines claiming a treasure, but in the quiet, complex, deeply technical world of supply chain geopolitics. If the United States hopes that a single mineral discovery can shake China's dominance, it should also expect and prepare for China's inevitable countermove. For Beijing is not merely watching the reshuffling of global mineral supply chains, it is actively shaping them. China's advantage in critical materials is not an artifact of luck, but the product of a grand strategy that spans decades. And grand strategies do not crumble overnight. China's first likely response will be strategic patience, a trait deeply embedded in its political culture. Beijing understands that mining projects, particularly in Western democracies, face long environmental reviews, social opposition, financing delays, and political swings. A discovery on paper does not equate to industrial power. China has learned to play the long game, and it will quietly observe whether the U.S. can translate geology into geopolitics before reacting visibly. Yet beneath this patience lies a sophisticated, multi-layered plan. 1. Beijing will reinforce its processing stranglehold. China's dominance rests on midstream refinement, not the mines themselves. Even if the U.S. uncovers a major deposit, raw ore is useless without processing. China has the technicians, the chemical engineering expertise, the logistics corridors, and above all, the scale. It can expand refinement capacity faster than the U.S. can build it. That is China's first line of defense. We should expect Beijing to deepen subsidies for its refining sector, accelerate green processing technology, and lock in global clients through long-term supply contracts. China will ensure that even if other nations discover minerals, they remain dependent on Chinese processing, for without processing, minerals are merely rocks. 2. China will leverage its dominance in downstream manufacturing. Beijing understands that the true battlefield is not extraction nor refinement, but the final products: batteries, electric motors, magnets, advanced alloys, and the architecture of clean energy. China leads nearly every downstream sector that gives rare earths their value. Therefore, even if the U.S. succeeds in building upstream capacity, China still controls the industries that turn minerals into economic power. By tightening these downstream markets, China can maintain leverage without overt confrontation. 3. China will deploy asymmetric tools quietly but decisively. Should Washington escalate, Beijing has instruments ready. Export controls on niche minerals, gallium, germanium, graphite materials that are extremely difficult to replace and vital for chips, EVs, and military systems. Selective licensing barriers for Western firms operating in China. Price manipulation, using state-backed giants to flood the market, undercutting U.S. projects before they mature. Strategic partnerships with countries rich in untapped mineral resources, from Africa to Latin America, ensuring alternative supply routes. Beijing knows that asymmetric tools are often more powerful than symmetrical confrontation. 4. China will deepen its Belt and Road mineral networks. In Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, China already finances roads, ports, smelters, and hydropower plants, the very infrastructure needed for mineral extraction and processing. The U.S. focuses on mines. China focuses on entire ecosystems. By expanding its presence abroad, China ensures that even if the U.S. rebuilds domestic supply chains, the rest of the world remains anchored to Chinese industrial gravity. 5. China will frame Washington's move as a technological containment strategy. In Beijing's strategic mind, the U.S. discovery and the political rhetoric surrounding it is part of a larger pattern: semiconductor restrictions, investment screening, tech bans, and alliance building in the Indo-Pacific. From China's perspective, Washington is constructing a wall, and minerals are another brick. Thus, China may respond diplomatically by rallying the global South, presenting itself as the champion of open markets against what it frames as American techno-nationalism. 6. China will accelerate innovation to escape dependency concerns. China fears one thing: being trapped by Western choke points in areas like lithography, aerospace materials, or high-end semiconductors. Thus, Beijing will push more aggressively into mineral recycling, synthetic alternatives, next-generation energy materials, closed-loop industrial systems. If China can reduce its own vulnerability, it becomes far less threatened by U.S. mineral autonomy. In sum, China's countermove will not be loud, it will be structural. Washington imagines the mineral competition as a race. Beijing sees it as an ecosystem. The U.S. is reacting to a discovery. China is managing an empire of supply chains that it built patiently over 30 years. The question, then, is not whether China will respond, it already is. The question is whether Washington understands the scale of the challenge. A mineral deposit can spark political excitement, but China's reaction will test whether the United States is prepared for a genuine industrial renaissance or merely playing at one. The unfolding mineral discovery in the American interior, championed energetically by Donald Trump and amplified across the political spectrum, does not exist in an economic vacuum. Its reverberations extend far beyond the geology of one site or the politics of one nation. What we are witnessing is the early formation of a new axis in global industrial power, one that tests the very architecture of globalization itself. From Beijing to Brussels, from Seoul to São Paulo, capitals are recalibrating their expectations, wondering whether this discovery marks a temporary tremor or the beginning of a foundational shift in the technological order. For more than 2 decades, China has dominated critical mineral processing, lithium-ion battery manufacturing, and rare earth magnet supply chains. This dominance was not accidental. It emerged from deliberate long-term planning, state-backed investments, and industrial policies that Western leaders largely dismissed until the geopolitical environment shifted dramatically. Now, with the U.S. unearthing deposits that could rival or surpass China's capacity in certain minerals, the balance of leverage is being rewritten. Yet, this rewriting is neither simple nor automatic. The first global implication is the fragmentation of supply chains. Countries long reliant on Chinese minerals may begin to hedge, seeking diversified and geopolitically safer alternatives. This could accelerate a multipolar mineral economy, reducing systemic vulnerabilities but also raising the cost of transition. Europe, already anxious about its dependence on both Russia for energy and China for technology inputs, will view the American discovery as a potential lifeline if, and only if, the U.S. commits to transparent, stable export frameworks rather than using minerals as political leverage. Secondly, this discovery intensifies the race for technological independence. India, Japan, and South Korea, nations deeply tied to semiconductor and battery production, understand that mineral access is the foundation of industrial sovereignty. If the U.S. becomes a central hub for strategic minerals, these countries will seek long-term partnerships, co-investments, and offtake agreements. In effect, Washington could gain not just an economic advantage, but a renewed diplomatic asset: mineral diplomacy. Third, global markets will experience volatility. Commodity prices tend to spike in moments of geopolitical uncertainty, but they also respond strongly to narratives. The mere suggestion that the U.S. HSSDSL could break China's dominance may trigger market realignments even before the first ton of mineral is commercially processed. Investors, cautious of overexposure to Chinese-linked supply chains, may redirect capital to American mining projects, reshaping the landscape of global resource finance. And yet, the implications also carry a warning. If the U.S. approaches this moment through a framework of zero-sum triumphalism, it risks creating new geopolitical rifts. China will not remain passive. Beijing may respond with price manipulation, export restrictions, or accelerated industrial innovation. The world could see intensified competition rather than cooperative resilience. Ultimately, the global economic implications of this Trump-backed discovery depend less on the minerals themselves and more on the philosophy underpinning their governance. If the U.S. enters is a virgin and FUSFS chooses collaboration over coercion, transparency over resource nationalism, and long-term sustainability over short-term political theatrics, this moment could strengthen global stability. If not, it may simply usher in a new frontier of conflict, one fought not with ships and missiles, but with minerals, markets, and the invisible machinery of global supply chains. As we arrive at the end of this analysis, we must acknowledge a simple truth: mineral discoveries alone do not reshape the world. What reshapes the world are the political decisions, ethical commitments, and long-term strategies built around such discoveries. The Trump-backed project, uncovering rare minerals, touted as the key to ending China's tech dominance, technically represents an opportunity, but philosophically it represents a test. A test of whether the United States will choose wisdom over bravado, partnership over polarization, and genuine innovation over geopolitical performance. For decades, the global economy has rested on a fragile but functional interdependence. China built the mineral processing capacity the West ignored. The US, Europe, and East Asia built the high-tech industries that depended on it. Together, this uneasy marriage held the modern technological world together. Smartphones, electric vehicles, microchips, renewable energy, satellite components, and the entire digital ecosystem. Today, the discovery of vast U.S. mineral deposits does not simply threaten China's dominance, it threatens to disrupt this balance of mutual reliance. The question, therefore, is not whether America can break China's monopoly. It almost certainly can, with enough investment, coordination, and discipline. The deeper question is whether doing so will make the world safer, more stable, and more prosperous, or whether it will trigger another era of resource confrontation. This is where humility, long-term planning, and diplomatic maturity matter more than geological luck. If the U.S. treats these minerals as a strategic commodity to weaponize another instrument of geopolitical pressure, then the global system will fracture further. China will retaliate. supply chains will harden. Regional blocs will form around resource access. Such a world is not one of cooperation, but of constant suspicion, and history is unforgiving to great powers that try to dominate the global economy through coercive resource control. However, there is another path, one more consistent with global stability. The United States could position its new minerals not as a tool of exclusion, but as a foundation for shared industrial development. Instead of boasting about ending China's dominance, Washington could lead in creating a diversified, sustainable, transparent mineral economy. It could partner with Europe, collaborate with Asia, and yes, even negotiate with China on environmental standards, responsible production, and equitable distribution. In this version of the future, minerals become a bridge, not a weapon. For China, this discovery must also serve as a reminder that no nation can maintain technological supremacy indefinitely. Dominance built on fragile supply chains or single-country monopolies will always face entropy. But China, like the US, has the capacity to turn competition into innovation rather than confrontation. The world would benefit greatly from this choice. However, there is another path, one more consistent with global stability. The United States could position its new minerals not as a tool of exclusion, but as a foundation for shared industrial development. Instead of boasting about ending China's dominance, Washington could lead in creating a diversified, sustainable, transparent mineral economy. It could partner with Europe, collaborate with Asia, and, yes, even negotiate with China on environmental standards, responsible production, and equitable distribution. In this version of the future, minerals become a bridge, not a weapon. For China, this discovery must also serve as a reminder that no nation can maintain technological supremacy indefinitely. Dominance built on fragile supply chains or single-country monopolies will always face entropy. But China, like the US, has the capacity to turn competition into innovation rather than confrontation. The world would benefit greatly from this choice. Ultimately, the mineral discovery is not about Trump, not about China, and not even about the United States alone. It is about the emerging architecture of our global technological civilization. The decisions taken today, how to mine, how to trade, how to cooperate, will determine whether the 21st century becomes a century of sustainable progress or one defined by a new Cold War of resources. If wisdom prevails, this moment could become a turning point toward a more balanced and resilient global economy. If not, it may simply become another chapter in humanity's long history of turning opportunity into conflict. The choice, as always, rests with us.